It's my face. Hello and welcome back to the Ash and Stone channel. My name is Chris and today I'm just going to give you an introduction to the solo narrative campaign I'm looking at having a go at. We'll see how it turns out. Basically we're going to be following the adventures of the Dwarf Prince, Baradic Kingson, and his attempt to establish a kingdom in the Marches. So yes, we'll see how it goes. It's going to be very narrative. Hopefully the results of one scenario will feed onto the next, and depending on how things go, it'll depend on the paths we take and how the army and the enemies themselves grow. So it's going to start off fairly easy as we sort of step into it and figure out what's going on, and as the battles progress the enemies will get more difficult, and yeah, we'll see if I can keep up. So basically it'll be using the Oathmark rules, and because it's going to be a solo game I'll be playing both sides. I do have a simple, really simple AI for the enemy to help out with which unit's going to be activating, but because everybody has to activate, it does add that little bit of randomness in there as well, so it should be an interesting experience. I'll be using the unusual and catastrophic events from each of the books to add a little bit of spice to each of the games and a bit more randomness and narrative flavour to them. And I'll also be following the experience points for the characters, and I'll use units as well and give them battle honours depending on the experience they get in battle. So hopefully some of the units will begin to make a name for themselves, and if they get wiped out, well, that'll add to the narrative, doesn't it? Anyway, I'll give you a quick example of the AI that I'm going to use, and yeah. Let's do a quick explanation on the advantage-disadvantage mechanic I'll be using to add a little bit of an AI to this solo experience. So I have advantage and disadvantage tokens, which we'll put next to each of the goblin units when it's the goblin's turn to activate something, depending on their situation on the battlefield. So for each advantage that the unit enjoys, we'll add an advantage token, and for each disadvantage, we'll add a disadvantage token. So as an example, the goblin soldiers at the front here will have an advantage because they are able to charge the dwarf unit in front of them. But they'll also have a disadvantage because the dwarves are able to charge them. The goblin archers will have an advantage because they are currently able to shoot over and hit those dwarf soldiers. So in this particular case, the first unit to activate will be the goblin soldiers because they have 2 tokens to the 1 token of the goblin archers. If, however, the dwarf unit had already activated, we would be able to remove that disadvantage because the goblin unit cannot be charged by the dwarves, and we could add an advantage back because a unit that has already activated has negative modifiers to attack you. It is safer to charge them. If a unit were to appear here, for example, the goblins suddenly are at a disadvantage because they are in charge range of an enemy. They also have a further disadvantage because it is their flank that is exposed. So in this situation, the goblin archers have more tokens than the goblin soldiers, and so you would activate the goblin archers. Hopefully that makes sense. It's just a case of looking at the battlefield whenever the goblins need to activate, and looking and seeing what the situation is, what advantages and disadvantages each unit has, and going from there. In the case where there is an equal number of tokens, you would activate the unit that has the most advantage tokens. So in this case you would activate the goblin soldiers with 2 advantage tokens against the 1 of the goblin archers, and this will just make the AI a little bit more aggressive. If all of the units have the same number of advantages, this is where you would roll the dice. Let me know your comments down below. Thank you for sticking around, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.